So in today's video, we are going to be discussing if Drew Brees should come back to the NFL. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So obviously, as we all know, Drew Brees worked for NBC last year. He was an analyst for them. He did most of the Notre Dame games. He did some of the booth games for the NFL, and he was also a studio host for Football Night in America. Now, some people said that his tenure at NBC really wasn't the best, that he really struggled a lot of games, highlighting the Bengals and Raiders game that he called this past year in the playoffs, saying he really wasn't that good of a play-by-play guy in the booth. Now, I'll be 100% honest. When I'm watching a sporting event, they're kind of just white noise. I don't really pay attention to them, so I really don't have a comment on if Drew Brees was good or bad, because honestly, when I'm watching a football game, I don't really listen to the commentators that much, if I'm being 100% honest. But this question of Drew Brees coming back to the NFL basically stemmed from him likely not being back at NBC this next season, tweeting out that he's basically undecided with his future and that he doesn't know what he's going to do. He sent out a tweet basically saying with his future undecided that he'll let us know, but as of right now, we don't know what Drew Brees and his future hold. But then that also begged the question of should he come back and play football. Now, if we're looking at the Saints perspective, which if he does come back, I really do think the only team he would come back and play for would be the Saints. And from a Saints standpoint, I think that it would be in a perfect spot for Drew Brees to come back. I think this team is absolutely loaded. They did lose Sean Payton to retirement this offseason, but they brought in Dennis Allen. They stayed in-house and they promoted their defensive coordinator, Dennis Allen, to head coach, which was a perfect move. So if Drew Brees does come back, he knows Dennis Allen, so that's going to be a good match. And then you have the Saints offense, which is just absolutely loaded with talent right now. It has one of the best rosters on offense when it comes to the depth of their talent, the talent that they have on their team. So if he comes back, he's going to get loaded with talent. Now, they did lose Teron Armstead to the Miami Dolphins in free agency, but they drafted Trevor Penning to that offensive line. So really the offensive line is set. The Saints are really good at drafting offensive linemen anyway, so the offensive line is perfect. So Drew Brees isn't necessarily going to worry about having to get hurt. And then if we're looking at the skill positions, like I said, it is absolutely loaded. It is probably one of the better skill position groups in the NFL. If we first look at Michael Thomas, he wasn't really healthy last season. He missed games, and he's going to be coming back, and Drew Brees and Michael Thomas were just an absolute unit together. Those two guys were putting up yards galore on defenses. Those two were an unstoppable force. So Michael Thomas coming back and healthy is great for the Saints offense and another weapon that they're going to have, along with the fact that they just signed Jarvis Landry, who's looking for new scenery for his career after being in Cleveland and not really doing much the last few years of his career. So finding a new place, coming home to New Orleans is a perfect spot for Jarvis Landry, who's going to be playing with a fire under him to have a better season and basically reboot his career and be the receiver that he knows he can be. They drafted a great receiver in Chris Olave out of Ohio State, and then you have Marquez Callaway, who had an unbelievable season last year. His numbers weren't huge, but he took a huge step in the right direction this past year, going from 213 yards to 700 yards receiving. He took a massive leap his second year, going from, like I said, 200 yards to 700 yards. So this receiving group is very good. We have a proven talent in Michael Thomas. You have a guy in Jarvis Landry who we know is good, is looking to revitalize his career. We have Marquez Callaway, who has proven that he's going to get better every single year as the trajectory that he's on. And then you bring in a guy like Chris Olave. You put them in that receiving group, and they're going to be a really good group of receivers. And then you also have Alvin Kamara, who's one of the top tier running backs in the entire NFL. So if we're looking at the Saints offensively, obviously it's a perfect time for Drew Brees to come back if he wanted to. And then you look at the defense, they have an absolutely elite defense. They just signed Tyrann Mathieu this offseason, so they're getting another hometown guy to come play on that defense. And they are in a defense that already had guys like Cameron Jordan, Marcus Davenport, Marshawn Lattimore, and CJ Gardner-Johnson. So the defense is going to be once again loaded, and a great defense once again for the Saints. So if we're looking at the structure of the Saints, obviously this is a perfect time for Drew Brees to come back. It's a great time for him to come back because everything is set in stone for Drew Brees to be a successful quarterback. And obviously Drew Brees is the best quarterback in Saints franchise history. That's not the issue with Drew Brees, because Drew Brees is great. We know how great Drew Brees is. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. But the problem with Drew Brees is I don't think his body would be able to handle playing a full season in the NFL. His body was basically giving out by the end of his career. He literally was injured like crazy. And I just think for his body's sake, I don't think Drew Brees can play another snap in the NFL. I don't think that would be smart for Drew Brees. Because if we're looking at the injuries that Drew Brees had back in 2020, he had a torn rotator cuff and he had 11 broken ribs and also a collapsed lung. So Drew Brees literally was beaten up like crazy. You add on top of that, he had a foot injury that year, and Drew Brees' body was basically giving up. And then you also look at the fact that Drew Brees was struggling to push the ball down the field. It looked like he was struggling to push the ball down the field even 15 yards. So Drew Brees cannot play at a top level quarterback anymore. I really don't see that happening. I like Drew Brees. I love Drew Brees. I thought he was great to watch, but he just physically can't do it anymore. And I'm not saying he can't in a negative way. It's just we've seen him play. 2020 was rough for him. Like he was struggling at times to push the ball down the field. And I just don't think that's good for Drew Brees to come back and do that to himself when he already knows it was a rough time playing this past season. And I think Saints fans would rather watch Jameis Winston sling it down the field, maybe cause a few mistakes throughout the season, than watch Drew Brees struggle to even move the ball on offense. It was sad to watch Drew Brees play, and I don't think any football fans, Saints fans, I don't think anybody wants that. This is Jameis Winston's team. Jameis Winston obviously was showing promise last year, going 5-2 in games that he started, and they weren't having him do much, but Jameis Winston was running this offense perfectly to exactly how the Saints wanted them and wanted him to last year. So the Saints are in a good spot with Jameis Winston. Now, obviously, if Drew Brees came back, I'm sure they would welcome him back. But just for Drew Brees' body and his sake, I just don't think it would be smart for Drew Brees to come back and play football. Because if he does come back, the only team I could see him coming back for, like I said, is the Saints. There's other teams like the Seahawks and Panthers that need quarterbacks, but I just don't see him going to those teams. I don't think he would ever play for another team other than New Orleans. But even then, Drew Brees, I like him. But with how beat up his body is, it would be hard for me to watch him come back. It'd be hard for me to watch him play. I don't want to call him a noodle arm, but he could not push the ball down the field when his career ended, late in his career. So I think the best bet for Drew Brees is to find something to do, and if he wants to, try to improve in the booth, try to become better at being a TV host. But coming back to football, not the best option for Drew Brees. But those are my thoughts on Drew Brees possibly coming back to the NFL based off the speculation and everything that we know that is going on around him and this landscape of the NFL offseason that is starting to get in the dead season. But give me your thoughts down below of Drew Brees possibly coming back to the NFL, or what do you think Drew Brees is going to do next? Give me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one.